She appeared like a whisper in the dark, sitting alone in the corner of a bar, wrapped in shadow, as if she wanted to disappear. But Elias noticed. How could he not? Her bluish skin shimmered under the light, and the bioluminescent patterns on her arms seemed to pulse, as if they were alive. There was something about her, something that didn't belong there. At first, it was just curiosity, a mystery he didn't need to solve. But when fate brought them together again, one thing became clear. Vanya wasn't there by chance. She was running from something, from someone. And Elias, now, he was caught in the middle of it. What is she hiding? Who is hunting her? And, more importantly, is there still time to escape?
When Elias saw Vanya for the first time, she was hidden in a corner of the bar where he worked, bathed in dim light. She stood out even in a world where humans and aliens lived together. The bright lights made her skin shine a deep ethereal blue, and there were faint bioluminescent patterns on her arms that pulsed ever so slightly as if they had a life of their own. Most of her kind had become part of human society a long time ago, so their appearance wasn't seen as strange anymore. But there was something different about her. She didn't really belong there. The way her eyes were sharp, how she barely touched the glass in front of her, and how far away she sat from everyone made it look like she was always ready to leave. That night, Elias didn't think about her much other than being interested. It's just another stranger going through. But it looked like fate had other ideas. He saw her again after a few weeks. Not in the dark, busy bar, but in the hallway of his own apartment building. His new friend. A chance event? He wasn't sure. People took note of the way she dressed. She stood out not only because of the delicate lines on her forehead, the golden glow of her eyes, and the way her dark hair with streaks of deep violet seemed to catch the light in a way that human hair doesn't, but also because of the way she moved. Wash. Be quiet, always looking out. The time Elias spent working in bars made him aware of people who were hiding things. Vanya wore hers like armor. At first, there were only small talks. There was a nod in the hall, a nice but faraway hello in passing. She was quiet and kept to herself all the time, never staying long enough for a chat. Though interest doesn't go away easily, and the more he saw of her, the stronger it became. Something stronger. But Vanya wasn't simple to understand. She was like an unreadable book. She wouldn't let anyone read her secrets. Her half-smiles and words were carefully chosen to show just enough to be interesting but never enough to understand. It seemed like every time Elias thought he was making progress, she would pull away just out of reach. He should have been angry about it. Could have. But what interested him most was how interesting it was. It was hard for him not to notice how she avoided eye contact when the subject got too personal. He tried not to think about why she jumped when she heard behind her footsteps in the hall. He tried not to think about how her face would get disconnected when he asked her where she was from or why she never seemed to have guessed. But as time went on, she let him in more and more. It was never by making big moves or making dramatic statements. It was in the little things like how she stayed a little longer when they talked and how her rare laughter made her seem less serious. It was sweet how she let him see the quiet parts of her life. She hummed old songs under her breath when she thought no one was listening, and she always left her window slightly open while she slept. Her bioluminescence gave off a soft glow that moved along with her heartbeat. He found out that she liked music, especially old music by people. That she never went to sleep without any light. That she always wore a charm around her neck and never took it off, but she never talked about what it meant. He found out that she wasn't cold, even though she put up walls around herself. She wasn't far away. She was scared. It was late at night and the hallways were dimly lit. There were stolen looks and times when silence spoke louder than words. That's when Elias realized he had fallen. They felt like they had something weak but real between them. There was a current in the air, a link they didn't say but felt. When she thought he wasn't paying attention, she looked at him in a certain way. It was in the way her touch made his heart beat faster every time she brushed past him and how it lingered longer than it should have. Vanya was running away from something, though. She looked over her shoulder in busy places and tensed up when a stranger stayed too long near their building. Both of these things told him something. He could tell because she didn't answer the phone or text messages, and her bright eyes got darker when certain names were said. Elias had no idea what was scaring her, but he could feel it coming on. And it was already too late when she finally let him see a little bit of the truth. There was a real fear of danger. It was here, smothering her with its arms around her. And now it had caught him too. What began as a quiet interest had become something much more dangerous. A chase. A game with too many stakes, where the past had come to get what it owed. Vanya was the cost. It didn't matter how hard they fought, the chances were always against them. The walls were closing in and there were not many options left. Last but not least, no amount of love could change the past. Elias didn't want to let her go though. That was true even though her secrets were weighing on them and danger was getting closer every day. He just couldn't leave her. He ought to have. He told himself that a lot of times. No matter what her past was or what was after her, it wasn't his battle to fight. Still, it hurt him to think about turning his back on her and acting like she was just another passing thing in his life. It took him too many nights to remember how her voice got softer when she talked about things she loved. It took too many hours to watch how the glow of her bioluminescent patterns changed with her feelings, like her body had its own language. He had seen how her walls fell down when she thought she was safe with him, even if only for a moment. That someone stayed because they cared. He stayed because of this. Of course, Vanya tried to push him away. It was too risky, she told him. He knew that getting close to her was a mistake he couldn't fix. One night, she stood in the dim light of his room and said, "You don't understand, Elias." She had her arms around herself like she was getting ready for a storm. "This isn't just about me. There are people, powerful people, who don't forget, who don't forgive." He moved closer because he didn't want her to run away. "Then let me understand." She shook her head, and something heavy was cast over her golden eyes. "You don't know what you're asking for." He might not have. Maybe he didn't see what was coming and it would kill them both. It was worse to think that she would have to deal with it by herself. He had said, "You think I haven't noticed?" in a calmer, softer voice. "You're always looking over your shoulder. You barely sleep. You flinch at shadows. And no matter how much you try to pretend you're fine, I know you're not." She had just stared at him for a long time and no one could read her face. Then, finally, she broke through something. She turned her head away and let out a breath that sounded too much like giving up. "But before we see what Vanya is about to reveal, let me ask you something. If you were in Elias's place, would you keep pushing for the truth, or would you let Vanya keep her secrets? Some mysteries can be dangerous to uncover, and sometimes knowing too much can put you at risk. Drop a comment below. Would you insist on knowing, or would you respect the distance?" That night, she told him some truth. Not everything. Not yet, but enough. Something happened to her that she could never take back. A mistake. It was a lie. Because of a choice she made out of despair, she was now a target. Now the people she had hurt were after her. Elias looked at it. He didn't talk over her. He didn't ask for more than she was ready to give. When she was done, she finally looked at him with something like expectation, waiting for him to do something, to leave, to tell her she was right the whole time. He did the only thing that felt right. He reached out to grab her hand. His touch made her skin feel warm, and her bioluminescence lit up softly in response. A steady flow of light that looks like a heartbeat. He just said, "I'm not leaving." She didn't breathe for a split second. It was so quiet that he almost didn't hear her say, "You should." She didn't pull away though. That was the real start, not the careful dance they had been caught in before. It was in the quiet times between worry and fear, when they turned to each other for comfort when the outside world got too close. Not yet they didn't talk about love. Not when every day felt like it was a gift. Though they didn't say it, Elias would brush her hair back when she was too tired to move, and Vanya would reach out for his hand when she thought he wasn't looking. They slept on his couch at night with her head resting on his shoulder. For a short time, they pretended that they didn't have to hurry. Time did not wait though. There were more and more signs. The threats were not as subtle. A message written in a language he couldn't read on her door. A shadow that stays outside their building for too long. As if something were closing in on you, like a noose getting tighter. After that, one night Vanya was gone. When Elias got home, her apartment was empty, but she could still faintly smell her, and her pendant, the one she never took off, was still glowing on the counter. That's when he knew the time they had stolen was over. He didn't want to lose her though. That's why Elias was the first one to start running. Not right away, but toward her. Elias had never thought of himself as the type of person who would go after ghosts. When he held a glass or walked down a known street, he liked things that were real and could be touched. But Vanya changed that. Like a whisper, she crept into his life like a secret that was supposed to be kept. And now that she's gone, she took a piece of him with her. It was too quiet in the room without her. There was still a faint, out-of-place smell of her in the air, like the memory of a dream. He ran his finger along the ring she had left behind. It felt warm and smooth, like it had taken in her body heat. She didn't take it off. Never. That meant she didn't leave on her own. That thought hit him like a load of ice. Why wait? He called her right away. He knew there would be no answer ahead of time. He moved instead. The door to her room was slightly open, which was a bad sign. He walked inside and looked around the room. She had always kept things simple, as if she had never really settled down. There won't be any personal decorations or emotional stuff, but there were signs that things were hard. A chair fell over, a broken glass next to the sink. She didn't just leave. Someone had taken her. Elias clenched his hands. It was hard for him to keep track of all the options. Did she know this was going to happen? Had she been pulling away because of that? Why didn't she tell him? She thought he wouldn't stand up for her, right? He grabbed the pendant and put it in his pocket, his jaw getting tight. He was going to get her back if they had taken her. Small clues were used to begin the search. For example, a bartender remembered seeing a man staying too long near Vanya's regular spot, and a neighbor remembered hearing footsteps in the hallway late at night. He followed every clue, every thread, until they all led to the same one conclusion. They came to get her. They were also not going to let her go easily. He thought it was strange how fast things could change. At one point, life was easy to plan. Work, late nights, and the odd quiet drink. The next thing he knew, he was searching for a woman who had turned his life upside down in a place that felt strange to him. Vanya had been running for a long time. It was his turn now. He wasn't running away though. He was running toward her. He was not going to stop. Elias walked through the city like he was crazy. He wasn't tired. He didn't eat much. They spent all of their awake time looking for the tiniest signs of Vanya, putting together a puzzle that always seemed to be missing its most important pieces. He listened to stories that didn't lead anywhere until one finally did. He followed whispers in dark alleys and corners and traded money for information. A name. Not one he knew, but one that made the bartender tense up when he talked to them. The kind of noise that made a woman at the market stall whisper. Someone bad. Someone strong. Someone may have been looking for Vanya a long time before Elias met her. That wasn't enough. There was something though. He kept looking for that thread even though he was tired and his mind was on edge. Even though he felt the weight of doubt getting heavy on his shoulders. Because there was one thing that was always true. He couldn't lose her. Not at all. The city was very quiet the night he finally found a real lead. He was in front of an old building that had been left empty by everyone else but the people who needed to do business in the dark. He had tried to follow a name, a whispered direction, and a scary warning. It brought him here. Vanya was inside if he was right. His heart beat fast. His hands were clenched together. He had no idea what to do. Weapon free. He only had hopelessness and a firm belief that if she was still alive, he would get her out. He still went through even though the door was locked. After a few tries and a well-placed push, the rusty metal finally gave way. Inside, the air was thick and heavy like it was old. He moved slowly, taking careful steps each time. As his eyes got used to the dim light, he looked around the room, seeing empty boxes, old tools, and shadows that went on for too long. Then there was a sound. A calm breath in. Not deep, but his heart skipped a beat. A voice asked, "Vanya, keep quiet." "Elias?" he asked. It was just a breath, but it was enough. She was there when he turned the corner. Limited, bruised, but still living. When her golden eyes met his, they were wide with a mix of shock and relief. She was still beautiful even in this state. Her bioluminescence was barely flickering along her arms, and her body was tense as if she were still expecting the worst. He ran toward her, fumbling with the chains around her arms. He said in a low voice, "I'm getting you out of here." She didn't argue back, but there was something heavy and unspoken in her eyes. At the same time he reached for her, hope grew stronger in his heart. There was a break in the quiet when a door opened up. "Steps. Take your time." Check. Before he even turned, Elias could feel how heavy it was. It wasn't just them. Elias stopped moving. The sound of footsteps echoed through the building, making his heart beat faster. He took shallow breaths. "Take your time. Not rushed." These are the steps of someone who wasn't in a hurry and knew they already had the upper hand. Vanya tensed up next to him, and even though it was dark, he could see her eyes getting darker and her bioluminescent marks moving all over her skin in strange ways. Fear. Not of him, not even of what was going on, but of the person who was coming. He didn't ask too many questions. He worked faster on the ropes around her arms, fumbling with them and pulling on knots that were too tight. "You shouldn't be here," she said in a whisper that was hard to hear. He looked at her face and quickly missed the chance to ask what she meant. There were no more steps. After that, clap, clap, clap. Slow, thoughtful cheers. Elias turned around. In the dark, just past the broken moonlight beams coming in through the dirty high windows, there was a figure. Big, wide shoulders. He was dressed in dark clothes, and the lack of light made it hard to see his features. However, Elias only had to see him briefly to know one thing. This person had been waiting for him. "I have to admit," the man said, his voice smooth and almost amused, "I didn't think you'd come this far." That was it from Elias. He put himself a little in front of Vanya because it was habit. He didn't know this man's name, but he did know that she had ran away because of him. The stranger sighed as if he were sad. He finally came into the light by taking another step closer. You don't even know what you're getting yourself into, do you? Elias felt upset inside. The man wasn't a person, at least not all the way. It was a soft gray-blue color on his skin, but it didn't glow like Vanya's did. His eyes were too dark, like two empty spaces that didn't reflect any light. In the way he moved, there was something off about him. It felt like he was too controlled and exact. Vanya took a deep breath. She was still weak from what they had done to her, but he could feel her moving behind him as she tried to stand up. Joran, she said in a low voice. The man Jorgen smiled, and Elias got a chill from that smile. Vanya, he answered, you always were good at running, but even you must have known it wouldn't last forever. Elias clenched his hands. He felt like his muscles were ready for a fight, but he wasn't sure if he could win. He asked, who are you? What do you want with her? Joran didn't even look at him for a second. He said, that's cute. The human thinks he matters. Elias got angry. He was only interested in getting Vanya out of here and didn't care what this man thought of him. Joran turned his attention back to her and tilted his head a little. Did you tell him, Vanya? Did you tell him what you did? The woman didn't answer. Elias took a quick look at her and searched her face. She turned her head away. He felt something twist in his gut. He knew what Vanya was hiding. He knew she was hiding something from the moment he met her. But it was different when she heard it from the man who had taken her. She didn't tell you, did she? Joran asked with a laugh. Oh, that's rich. Poor thing, you really think she's just some innocent girl on the run? Elias didn't answer. He just clenched his teeth and stood firm between Vanya and the man who had come to take her. You need to let her go, Elias told her in a calm, low voice. Joran's grin got bigger. And what exactly do you plan to do if I don't? Elias had no idea what to do, but he had been to enough bars to stop fights between drunk men who thought they were unbeatable to know one thing. Waiting could be just as effective as hitting first. He had to talk to Joran some more. Getting Vanya out of here was important to him. He stood his ground then. You don't own her, he told her. Joran laughed. He sighed and said, oh, you poor naive little person. You really have no idea, do you? His face turned darker, and the amusement in it started to fade. He said, she already made her choice. And choices have consequences. Vanya moved behind Elias again. It was hard for her to breathe. He wasn't sure if they were scared or just too tired to move, but time was running out. Enough talking, Joran said as he moved forward. Elias did what he felt. He jumped and tried to hit something that would give Vanya a chance to move or get away. There was no plan or training for him to fight someone that wasn't human, but he was desperate, and sometimes that was enough. Joran didn't even move. Elias swung his fist, but before it could connect, something hit him. It was like an unknown hand grabbed his whole body and threw him backward. When he hit the ground hard, his ribs hurt and air rushed out of his lungs. Vanya let out a gasp. Joran let out a sigh. It was pathetic, he said. I really hoped you'd be smarter than this. Elias tried hard to get up, but he couldn't. He felt like he was weighed down by power, energy, or something he couldn't explain. Let him go, Vanya told him. Joran made a face. He shook his head and asked, so he can die trying to be your hero? No, Vanya, you're coming with me. And he stays out of it. Elias clenched his teeth. Not at all. That was not going to happen, he promised. Joran put out his hand to Vanya. You know the deal. Come quietly and I won't kill him. Elias's heart sank. Vanya was unsure, and his reluctance broke something inside him. She was going to leave. She was leaving. No, Elias sputtered, pushing his body to move even though there was an invisible force pressing against him. Vanya, don't. They looked at each other, and this was the first time since they met that he saw something real and open in her face. Feel bad. He turned his head away. His voice was rough as he said, I don't care what you did. I don't care what this is about. I'm not letting you do this alone. Her throat moved back and forth. Her bioluminescence went on and off. Afterwards, the whole building was shaking. They could see flickering lights and strangely long shadows. A gust of energy that Joran couldn't see shot outward and knocked him backwards. Elias let out a gasp when the pressure on his chest went away. When he looked up, Vanya was shining. It wasn't soft or subtle. It was overwhelming. As she held the pendant she had left in his apartment, the marks on her skin seemed to be alive and pulse with energy. Joran's smile went away. Oh, he said quietly, so you still have some fight left in you after all. Elias had never seen anything like the fire in Vanya's golden eyes before. After that, she moved. As Vanya took a step forward, the air shook with energy. The glow of her bioluminescence grew stronger, leaving creepy shadows on the warehouse walls. You barely had time for Joran to respond before she raised her hand. A wave of raw power came from her body and hit him like a tsunami. He stumbled and clenched his teeth, but he didn't fall. he said in a low voice. Impressive, wiping a small amount of blood from the corner of his mouth. But not enough. Joran hit back right away, giving Elias hardly any time to move. A dark, choking force rushed toward Vanya, and she got ready for it to hit her. The crash sent a shockwave through the building, putting so much pressure on the metal beams that they groaned. Elias jumped to his feet quickly, his heart beating fast. He wasn't strong enough or smart enough to fight this. He couldn't just stand there though. Vanya turned around and looked at him with her eyes. He knew right then, she was not going to get out of this alive. Not both of them. Vanya moved before Elias could stop her when Joran lunged again. She let out a burst of bright light that made the room too hot to stand. Elias saw her soft, sad smile one last time. It was like a quiet goodbye. After that, it got dark. It rained hard on his skin. He had no idea how he got outside or how the building had disappeared, leaving only ruins behind. He only knew Vanya was not there. She wasn't going back either. He knelt there in the cold with her pendant in his hand. He could feel her warmth leaving his skin. His thoughts kept going back to her last words, which were barely audible over the noise of the storm. You should have let me go. He never would have though. Not then. Not now. Never.
Elias thought he was ready for the truth, but did he really know what he was dealing with? The unknown can be dangerous, and some stories prove it in the worst way possible. If you like this one, the next will send chills down your spine. Click now and find out what happened.